Welcome to another episode of Fill in the Blank podcast. I'm here with Evan.
There's a pop filter now.
Yes, we have microphones. This is the first official episode with microphones. We're going to test it out on Fill in the Blank.
Sick.
Evan, do you know what we're talking about here today?
No, actually.
We're talking about plant rights.
Nice.
What comes to your mind when I say plant rights?
Mary Jane.
Cannabis rights?
Yeah.
That's a completely different topic.
I assume so.
Well, plant rights, it's basically, there's human rights, animal rights, all these different types of things.
Yeah.
People want rights. So why shouldn't plants have rights? And the whole concept is plants feel pain, but what other feelings do they have?
It's terrifying.
I mean, do you think if you're chopping up lettuce, that lettuce is screaming? You ever seen the movie Sausage Party?
Yeah.
Where they have to take bath salts to be able to understand what the food is feeling?
It's a funny fucking movie.
It's hard to believe that plants don't have these certain things without these types of drugs. Maybe they're on a whole nother perspective frequency that we can't even realize. It's definitely something that makes you think about.
See, it's already pretty horrific if animals are sentient. Plants is like an entire different question.
What's that movie by M. Night Shyamalan where the wind or something? It's called like The Wind, where the plants start like being able to speak to each other, and like they were doing this weird stuff where like they could give off this pheromone or wind, and when people smelled it, they'd start killing themselves.
Oh, The Happening.
Yeah, that's nuts, man. So imagine that happening. Okay, so plant rights are rights to which plants may be entitled. Such issues are often raised in connection with discussions about human rights, animal rights, biocentrism, or sentiocentrism. So based on the root brain hypothesis, it's controversial that roots behave like lower animals, with the apex seated at the anterior pole of the plant body where it acts like a brain or an organ. Plants make sounds like underground clicks that microbes and insects might be able to hear. They can communicate through chemicals. You see this known when you see an insect or something that starts eating like a particular plant, starts like just killing off that whole plant. What it will do to defend itself is it'll adapt to release a chemical or communicate with the other plants to say, hey, change the taste of your leaves so these bugs won't eat us. They'll stop eating us. Or change the taste of your leaves and your chemical compound of them to release a type of poison that will kill these things. So they're able to adapt to kill their predator.
See,
if something's cognizant like that, able to do adaptation change like that.
That specific kind of thing, that's less like conscious and more like a sensor. It's kind of like a computer detected, like a computer receives an instruction. It's like an if or coding statement. Like if I'm being eaten alive by a beetle, tell the other plants to change the taste of their leaves. Like,
what about the whole idea that there is a type of tree in South Africa that communicates through the roots using the root system? They can talk to each other.
It depends on what that
plants are known
means.
to communicate to each other. We just don't understand what they are saying or what they are trying to get across. So
it is a terrifying thought.
I think it's pretty
it's an entire like subset of sentient being that we're like.
There's a whole nother species of we know they're categorized as species, but a whole nother mind hive thinking out there. So the philosophy behind it. Samuel Butler's contains a chapter, The Views of the Earhorn Philosopher Concerning the Rights of Vegetables. If there are species of plants, we should also give them rights. On the question of whether animal rights can be extended to plants, animal rights philosopher Tom Regan argues that animals acquire rights due to being aware, what he calls subject of a life. He argues that this does not apply to plants, and that even if plants did have rights, abstaining from eating meat would still be moral due to the use of plants to rear animals. Anything able to adapt and is alive should have a right. That was my little note I had to add on that. According to philosopher Michael Marder, the idea that plants should have rights derives from plant subjectivity, which is distinct from human personhood. Paul W. Taylor holds that all life has inherent worth and argues for respect for plants, but does not assign them rights. Christopher D. Stone, the son of investigative journalist I. F. Stone, proposed in a 1972 paper titled "Should Trees Have Standing?" that if corporations are assigned rights, so should natural objects such as trees. Plants seem to be on a frequency we cannot perceive. While this not appealing directly to rights, Matthew Hall has argued that plants should be included within the realm of human moral consideration. His Plants as Persons, a philosophical botany discuss the moral background of plants in Western philosophy, and contrasts this with other traditions, including indigenous cultures which recognize plants as persons, active intelligence, or beings that are appropriate recipients of respect and care. Hall backs up his call for the ethical consideration of plants with arguments based on plant neurobiology, which says that plants are autonomous, perceptive organisms capable of complex, adaptive behaviors, including the recognition of self and non self. So, just hearing all that about philosophy, of the whole plant right genre and movement in the first place, I think it's not bad to give plants rights, to be 100% honest with you. I don't know when it comes, does that mean we're going to stop testing on plants? Because even animals have rights and we still test on them. We still test genetic stuff before we test on humans. But would that just be easier before we tested on animals? Would you be less likely to be offended about us testing things if we were testing it on plants instead?
Well, I'm already unconvinced of animal sentience,
You don't
and
think
like
animals are sentient? They don't have a soul?
very unconvinced. I'm not convinced we have souls,
Really?
let alone animals.
Well,
So
I mean, dude, there's been studies I think where people probably like the idea that they hooked up what was it, an electro, one of those what do you call it, the lie detector test, the polygraph
yeah,
test, up to a thing, up to a plant, like hooked it up to its leaves, and then they were boiling shrimp beside it, and they were trying to see if it was reacting to the animals dying in the water, if the plant could sense that. And the plant could at a very, very small level. It wasn't conclusive evidence because they did a number of trials and it seemed like this is still kind of inconclusive. But I mean, if we took a harder look at it, like how long until you really think like when you're cutting a head of cabbage, is that cabbage screaming its life out, like screaming like Shakespeare in a Macbeth play or something?
well, it all depends because cabbage is like what's the difference between the age, like connectiveness? Like a cabbage is like
Yeah, wait a minute. That's
completely grown disconnected from any other plants
you
other
just
than cabbage.
You just
Like
brought up a good point, though. If we count the age of trees and say this is how old a tree was, this is how old this was, and have expiration dates for stuff, we all have expiration dates. That's already giving it human-like characteristics, technically. So if you start thinking like, shouldn't all objects have rights?
it's already I think it's pretty obvious that certain plants should be protected. Like for example, trees. Like there's no real reason anymore to chop down a like ancient forest to get wood to build with. Like
Back in the day, they used
we
it for
have
teeth.
plenty of building materials available to us at this point. Like we don't need anything made of wood anymore, really. Like
It's
the best thing to do for the stuff that we need wood for is already being like replanting trees. Like that's already a practice done by logging companies, you know. So
it's just difficult to think because like when you look at a plant, it reacts to the carbon dioxide in your voice. Talking to a plant or playing some type of music is known to give it like a stimulating effect that might affect its growth. Now, there's been evidence on that. So if it's able to be, it's recognized music or like vibrations or types of affect your sunlight, just like how we do. We grow in the sun, not with the same kind of similarities as a plant, but we still benefit from the sun's radiation and vitamin D. And you look at that and then how a plant needs that to grow, and it also needs water. Those are two essential things humans need too. We need light and we need water, and we also need food. Plants can sometimes go without food, like they just get nutrients from the soil, which is their food basically. So it just comes into the aspect like if they already are basically pretty similar besides its looks, and it seems like that's how we kind of objectify people in general. If someone looks different than us, they kind of. I'm going deep down the rabbit hole with plant rights right now.
Well, see, all forms of life,
I'm pro carrot, bro.
all forms of life on the planet, they they all adapted to require the same sorts of things. Like anything that's in the sunlight needs sunlight to live. So
But even when they're talking about cultures that
the similarities between different forms of life are all kind of obvious in there. And deep sea life, like deep sea algae and fish, both don't require light.
well,
It's similar kind of.
a lot of times like with like if you want to think about plants and drugs and stuff, you talk about psilocybin mushrooms, people taking those types of mushrooms to get like a spiritual like change in their life. Like a lot of them they never act the same again. They get like this spiritual recognition of like this is what life truly is. I found the true meaning. I've seen the real light. And then like cultures that, hail plants as gods, like that like worship plants and see the like benefits of using this for spiritual purposes. It's been used throughout religion. You know, just certain types of drugs are coming from plants. Everything basically we have comes from a plant. Like it's a certain type of thing that comes from the plant, like a derivative from it. But like wood, that still it would never be out of. We would always need wood, just because of the fact, not just for building materials, but objects, things that you don't think have wood in them.
Yeah.
Like there's a small percentage of it. It just may be mixed in with other things. It might be a small percent. You know what I mean? So it just comes into the whole aspect of like you're giving plant rights. People I think see that as ridiculous. Like, oh, you're just being like ridiculous now because the whole aspect of you're giving a plant a right. Like nobody's going to be like that cabbage has rights, so you can't eat it. It's like when do we draw the line? Well, there's obviously points where we draw a line. Animals have rights, but they don't have rights like humans do.
Yeah.
They have rights to the point like we're able to eat animals, but at the same time, they also, you look at it and it's got a sense of like closeness to you. I think it's because they have eyes and all that. Like a plant doesn't have any of that.
Yeah. There's a difference between. See, I don't want to say that for fear of looking like an
Pissing
idiot.
off the vegans.
Looking like an idiot, like 45 years from now, and we're like, oh yeah, trees are just like alive, dude. But
they are alive.
But like sentient and like we can communicate, dude. Like
the talking tree.
Like exactly.
I want a tree that grants wishes.
Me too.
That'd be awesome. What would you wish for? Plant rights?
I'd wish for a non-sentient food source to feel good about eating.
Yeah, I don't want to feel bad every time I eat cabbage. So some scientific arguments. In the study of plant physiology, plants are understood to have mechanisms by which they recognize environmental changes. This definition of plant perception differs from the notion that plants are capable of feeling emotions. An idea also called plant perception, the later concept along with plant intelligence, can be traced to 1848 when Gustav Theodor Fechner, a German experimental physiologist, suggested that plants are capable of emotions and that one could promote healthy growth with talk, attention, and affection, much like I said, playing music with a plant. And it's psychologist, I said physiologist. I don't know why I mess up on the easiest words for me to get. So the Swiss Federal Ethics Committee on Non-Human Biotechnology analyzed scientific data on plants and concluded in 2009 that plants are entitled to a certain amount of dignity, but dignity of plants is not an absolute value. So plants should be like taken in a form of like, okay, they are a being, but like you got to draw the line somewhere. So the single issue party for plants entered candidates in the 2010 parliamentary election in the Netherlands. It focuses on topics such as climate, biodiversity, and sustainability in general. Such concerns have been criticized as evidence that modern culture is causing us to lose the ability to think critically and distinguish serious from frivolous ethical concerns. So what's the real issues is what they're talking about. Like,
Yeah.
if we start giving plants rights, are we going to forget about? It seems like we're just finding another way to go a different route from what our real problems are.
Yeah, because while we're talking about plants' rights in the United States, genital mutilation is happening in the Middle East.
Not
Like,
even that. Like, if you think about what PETA did with the animal crackers, they're no longer in cages anymore. If you notice on the box, they're open, and that's just because PETA got mad. Like, that's something that group is focused on. So if we get everyone focused on plant rights, then we're losing the true things of what other people are worried about. I don't think PETA is going to care that much about plants as much as they're caring about animal rights.
well, PETA already has its. I'm not going to talk about PETA.
They have their views. So some legal arguments. In his dissent to the 1972 Sierra Club v. Morton decision by the United States Supreme Court, Justice William O. Douglas wrote about whether plants might have legal standing. Inanimate objects are sometimes parties in litigation. A ship has a legal personality, a fiction found useful for maritime purposes. So it should be as respects valleys, alpine meadows, rivers, lakes, estuaries, beaches, ridges, groves of trees, swampland, or even air that feels the destructive pressures of modern technology and modern life. The voice of the inanimate object, therefore, should not be stilled. The Swiss constitution contains a provision requiring account to be taken of the dignity of creation when handling animals, plants, and other organisms, and the Swiss government had conducted ethical studies pertaining to how the dignity of plants is to be protected. In 2012, a river in New Zealand, including the plants and other organisms contained within its boundaries, was legally declared a person with standing to bring legal actions to protect its interests. So, some popular arguments. When challenged by people for the ethical treatment of animals to become vegetarian, Timothy McVeigh argued that plants are alive too. They react to stimuli, including pain, have circulation systems. The Animal Liberation Front argues that there is no evidence that plants can experience pain, and that to extent they respond to stimuli, it's like a device such as a thermostat responding to sensors.
That's
so
what
much
I
like
was saying.
yeah, much like you were saying with it being an artificial intelligence. There's not sufficient evidence on whether plants show pain because there isn't been conductive studies that have done it, at least in modern times, or someone's never actually taken the time to do it. So there's never going to be sufficient evidence if we don't try and get that evidence.
Exactly.
It's hard to believe that if something is able to adapt to changes and stuff. I see the whole AI thing, but
yeah, we have a lot of stuff to do in the scientific field.
It's like how hard
before we
do we have to work on getting the next iPhone?
It's not to say that a passionate scientist shouldn't be allowed to do such a thing, but
we just need to find the right person that can handle the experiment.
It'd be hard to get funding for that kind of.
The problem with the experiment when they did the polygraph test on the plants was that they couldn't reproduce the same outcome. But it's like, if humans have different emotions, are plants going to have different emotions? Maybe that freaking Venus flytrap is a little bit more hot-tempered than the fucking
the cabbage.
Cabbage probably a little bit more sensitive, more on its nurturing side.
Maybe the human cabbage, or the human developed and.
So we're doing the final jury declaim here. You think plants should have rights? Yes or no? You don't think plants should have rights?
Hot no. Well,
limited rights.
See, at the very least,
conservation rights at least.
Farmland or like farm plants.
Imagine being a farmer and have to worry about plant rights.
Exactly. Like
the ethics codes that will come out for how you have to take care of your crops.
Things that we eat, fruits, none of that. But like trees.
We're just talking about plants.
Trees, different. What? Well, like him said, like. Well, do fruits have feelings?
I don't want to know. I
What's
don't want fruit rights
between
either.
A fruit and a plant and a plant?
What's the difference between a vegetable and a fruit? Exactly. You don't even know, but you still categorize them anyway. So why can't we categorize plants into the human category?
Shit.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Fill in the Blank. If anybody want to look up plant rights, please do. It's definitely a weird little rabbit hole to dig down into if you're up at 3 o'clock in the morning and have nothing else better to do.
Yeah.
Stay tuned for the next episode.